This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
If you wish to purchase any teas, coffees, hot chocolate, sexy cold drinks, sweet savoury snacks and alcoholic beverages. So once again, your catering is now available from the very rear of this service today in Coach S. I'll look forward to serving you very soon. Thank you.
They were looking for breakfast and I just thought, oh gosh, don't stop here. Because there's nothing really, is there?
We did find quite a disparity in some of that pricing for some fairly familiar products. Prices perhaps in the 20 to 30% higher than the high street, not being entirely uncommon.
We present the collapse of the British Railway sandwich system, or...
Train food, stations, buffet bars, the infamous British Rail sandwich. But is it as bad now as it once was? I'm Sheila Dillon, and this is the Food Programme. Let's begin on a train. A journey with someone who spent more time than most on the move.
Next stop is Edinburgh Waverley.
There's Caroline looking at the way she does on her book. Hello. Good morning, looking fresh. I've seen our platform, it's all on time. Where are we going?
It's the 9:39 to Perth.
Platform 17 on time, right.
2 carriages. Little one, is it just 2? So my name's Caroline Eden. I'm a writer. I've published several books, and my new book, which has just come out, is called Cold Kitchen, and it's a memoir about my travels from sort of areas of Eastern Europe up to Central Asia. If I can take a train, I will take the train. I love train travel, not so much in the UK now because of the cost. But in countries like Kazakhstan, for example, 9th biggest country in the world, great to take a train. And one of the best things about taking the train in Kazakhstan is you have the samovar, the boiler at the end of each carriage still, which is great because there's always a supply of hot water for tea or for noodles. And I think, why can't we have something like that in the UK? And then you'd have to pay. You can just fill up your flask.
Well, we have a tea culture. You'd think we would have, wouldn't you?
But then you have to pay £2.80 or whatever for your Yorkshire tea or PG tips. Whereas I think, great, if you've just got the boiler on the go at the end of the carriage, you can flip-flop down there in your sandals. Everybody gets dressed and gets comfortable on a long train. You settle in, which is lovely, isn't it? You know, flip-flop down to the samovar. It's that constant noise of people going through the carriage.
In your chapter, Journey Food, in Cold Kitchen, there's one point where you're describing that when you set out on a journey, you pack a Tupperware box, as we still call them.
Yeah.
And there's a Tupperware box.
Yeah, so I baked for you. Last night I prepared for you my hillside pasties. And I say they're mine, they're Rosie Burkett's. She's a wonderful food writer, cookery book writer as well. And she had this amazing recipe for veg allotment pasties, where you put all the greens that you've got in your allotment, or in reality, the bottom of the fridge. Herbs, kale, Swiss chard, spinach, with feta and ricotta. And you make a veggie pasty and you coat it with some egg wash and you put za'atar and then you bake them.
Really describe what za'atar is.
Za'atar is a Middle Eastern herb mix, so it's mainly thyme, I think. Sesame seeds scattered on the top, and they're just my favourite thing because they're they're compact, they last a couple of days, and nothing falls out of a pasty when you're walking.
How funny it is that, every railway station has a pasty shop now.
It is a funny thing, because while I think the offerings in railway stations is not great, you have all the sort of chain sandwich shops and maybe the stationery shop selling packaged sandwiches as well. But I do like the fact that you can still buy pasty. And I think there's a reason for that. They're quite an old-fashioned thing, pasties, in a way. But they travel well. Whether you're sitting on a train carriage or whether you're out on a hill walking or in a car, they're good journey food, as I call them.
I mean, they've survived for a very good reason.
Yeah, so the pasties, shall I get them out?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you're ready to eat one yet. It might be a bit early, but...
Well, I don't know, we haven't...
Sheila hasn't had any breakfast yet.
Oh, this is classy.
That's your one, Sheila.
Ooh. So, I think maybe we should... You want to split one?
Well, I've got 3. So we're now... Oh, hang on, this is important. We're now going over the Firth of Forth, and we're on one of 3 bridges. This must be the most spectacular part of the journey. The engineering is just fantastic. I mean, if I was a tourist in Edinburgh, I would come and see these bridges, I think, first.
Yeah. When you're travelling on trains in Central Asia, is there a lot of food sharing?
Definitely, that happens. I mean, that happens. I'm trying to think. I mean, I've taken trains all across the region, and I think Russia is probably the country I've travelled in on trains where people have shared the most food. The lovely thing is, there's more of a sort of free economy that we don't have here. So people just board the trains often and start selling things, which I think is great. So people might jump on the train and have some samsa with them, for example, which are the little pastry turnovers that are very popular in Central Asia that look a bit like samosas, and you can just buy one of those, which is brilliant. It's probably going to have pumpkin, potato or lamb in it. I remember being by Lake Baikal in Russia, and people were boarding with a lot of the fish that's sold there, which absolutely stunk. The omel, which is the very heavily smoked fish. So people were bored with that, and it was winter. So then the smell would go through the heating system, and before you knew, you were kind of steaming in this fish scent, which is kind of amazing. And I think that's the thing. It's you can tell quite a lot about the place you're in by what people are eating on the train, what's being served in the dining car, if there's a dining car, and increasingly there isn't, which I always think is such a shame. You never know what you're going to get on trains. It can be wildly different. That's why you should always board with a picnic, with your journey feed.
I have to say, these pasties are really good. Well done, you and Rosie Burke.
I've also brought with me something else I tend to travel with.
Oh my goodness.
Very up to you
hip
with
flask.
It's just slow gin.
Ooh.
Would you like
Made
a
by
small...
you, yeah. Mm.
When it's cold and you're walking, it's quite nice as a way to warm up. Is that just a wee? Yeah, thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers. Delicious. When you've been on one of your great treks, one of your journeys across Central Asia, I wonder, when you get back to Britain, what strikes you about what food is available for travellers?
And when I get off the plane, I am often hungry, and I find myself in an M&S or a W.H. Smith's or something, and I buy a sandwich like everybody else. But I do find you can be at a very small railway station in Central Asia and there'll be fresher food to eat. It's an absolute last resort if I buy something on the train. I'd much rather board with something I've made at home, even if it's just a cheese and celery sandwich I've made, because it just feels healthier and it's more economical.
Although I did get very attached to some ginger biscuits on the East Coast train.
We all have our weakness. Mine are dry roasted nuts. I might go for a packet of those.
Caroline Eden sharing stories of her travelling food, which often includes her homemade pasties, as we rattled up the east coast of Scotland. We're only going as far as Perth, but it's the first leg of the journey to the Highlands, and we'll rejoin her shortly. While we might think we have a choice in what we buy at railway stations, a new report we came across while making this programme shows that's not quite the reality. Because it turns out many of those brands, looking quite different shop fronts, are in fact owned or managed as franchises by one company, a global travel food behemoth called SSP. Ritazza, Upper Crust, Millie's Cookies, Burger King, Starbucks, M&S Food to Go, Leon, all are theirs. That's 30% of all rail station catering outlets in the UK. A bigger market share than the next 6 retailers, think Costa and W.H. Smith's, combined. And they're doing well out of it. The company made £3 billion in global revenue in the last financial year, a quarter of that made in the UK. That dominance has come about largely due to historic protected leases in station catering, lucrative contracts that roll over automatically every year. Some of the leases have been in place since the 1950s, when the state-run British Rail began to sell off its catering. And eventually, these catering contracts were bought by SSP. Around a quarter of all station catering outlets are still covered by protected leases, made possible by the 1954 Landlord and Tenant Act, which in those post-war years aimed to stimulate long-term commercial activity. It's a history that's bizarrely still affecting what sandwich we buy while waiting for the 0900 from Paddington or Aberdeen. All this we discovered in a new report from the Office for Road and Rail. You heard of them? Me neither. But their report is revealing.
My name's Will Godfrey, so I'm Director of Economics, Finance and Markets at the Office of Rail and Road, the independent economic and safety regulator for Britain's railways. Probably most relevant to today's discussion is that we're also the competition authority for railway services.
As someone who spends a great deal of time on trains, it doesn't seem like there is much competition.
It's true. Our market study did find that there was one big player, SSP or Select Service Partners, with a number of brands actually, which might itself perhaps create an illusion of competition, or you might argue caters to different preferences. But yes, they've got 20 to 30% of outlets, and they account for a large proportion of customer spend, to the order of about 40 to 50% in railway station catering.
Can you summarise the findings of your market report?
So we've certainly found a market that is characterised by one very large player. There are also some sort of other recognised brands that are playing in this space, the likes of Costa Coffee, WH Smith, for example, which are independent of SSP. The nature of station catering is one where there are some protected leases, which do give a really sort of strong anchor point to those that are currently in the market. It can make it quite hard to displace them. Some of those brands are also present on the high streets. They will be familiar names there. But of course, we did find quite a disparity in some of that pricing for some fairly familiar products, you know, water, cola, coffee, etc. So when you average it out across the various products that we looked at, you do typically pay a bit more at railway stations, perhaps to the tune of, on average, about 10%. But as I say, there's wide variation within that, with prices perhaps 20 to 30% higher than the high street, not being entirely uncommon.
I mean, they must be real cash cows, the branches that are on railway stations, because you're sort of a captive market. Your train's late, you're tired.
I mean, I think it's not completely captive in the sense that there is still the opportunity for passengers, for example, to buy in advance on their way through the high street to a station. But nevertheless, you're right, there is to an extent a guaranteed footfall. And this is a large market. Customers are spending about £700 million a year on this and growing. The nature of the leases, I think, is one that makes it particularly difficult. And also the limited use of competitive tendering for some of these outlets is also something that we did notice. The sample we looked at sort of suggested perhaps in only about 5% of cases when there is the opportunity to open up an existing outlet, competitive tendering is perhaps used as little as 5%. And we thought that is an area where there is scope to sort of bring in more competition.
You mentioned the passenger experience. What do we actually know about what passengers want?
When we did our own sort of targeted research, what we actually found was that the passenger experience actually in railway stations wasn't quite as bad as some of that earlier research had suggested. Something that did stand out actually was that railway station catering fared reasonably well when compared to other markets like perhaps motorway services.
But that's a low bar.
Perhaps it is. And I think perhaps goes to that earlier point that we were making, which was in some of these instances, customers don't have very much choice. And so therefore, the more that the station operator, which is, if you like, the sort of the gatekeeper to the market here, does play a particularly important role. And if, there are local preferences towards local produce, local retailers, that is something that we would like to see catered for better. And prizing open some of these historic leases, I think, is one such way that we could do that.
But what do passengers think of rail food? We decided to do a flash survey of our own at Edinburgh Waverley Station as we waited for Caroline Eden. This might add a little colour to Will's rail catering report.
Hello, could we
ask you a question? We just wondered about what you think of what's available.
It's kind of expensive options. The only supermarket they've got is M&S, which is not the cheapest.
If you're on a really long journey, 4 or 5 hours, do you take your own food, or do you?
Because it's not very often I do that. I just get something from Pret or something as a treat. Because I do like their food, but it's just the price.
Hello, can we ask you a question?
Yes, do.
We're from the BBC Radio 4.
Yes.
We're just making a programme about travel food.
Oh, yes.
And I wondered what you thought of what kind of food's available on Waverley.
Shall I tell you the truth?
Tell the truth.
I actually have a picnic.
Do you?
Yes, we always have a picnic on the train.
What have you
Homemade. Oh, just from our little local bakery, some lovely brownies, and I make sandwiches because there's nothing really, is there? Though, say that I've got fresh fruit from a little fruit pot from Marks and Spencer's.
Wow. So you made sandwiches, you bought some brownies from the bakery near you, and you're not going to buy anything from the station.
No, it's really sad. I saw some young lads who they were looking for breakfast, and I just thought, oh gosh, don't stop here. I could tell you where to go in town.
We're just doing something about food on trains and food in train stations. Do you take your own food on train?
No.
But what do you eat when you're on a train if you're a long time?
Maybe I will eat first.
You don't buy things on the train?
Yeah, because it's a little bit expensive for me.
I see.
Yeah.
Are you a student?
Yes, I study in University of Edinburgh.
I'm from the US, so
really?
We're only visiting for this week. So we did get a train out of, I think it was King's Cross in London. Food was good there. My wife's just going to get some food here. But I think overall, food's a lot better in the UK than it is in the US.
Travellers at Edinburgh's Waverley Station. But back to Will Godfrey. I asked him why more companies serving station and train food don't buy direct from food producers. I found it interesting recently noticing that in Lyon, which is a fast food chain, that they obviously have a contract with a Welsh dairy called Callan Wen that won the BBC Food and Farming Awards as a producer a few years ago. And I thought, why don't more of them do that?
Perhaps that illustrates some of the sort of the innovation and the variety that I think is perhaps lacking in terms of that kind of creativity. If some of these outlets were a bit sort of freer, if operators, as I say, were perhaps looking for ways to contract out of protected leases and so forth, I think we might see a little more of that if only those hurdles were got over.
What's the number of people using road travel compared to rail? I mean, how important is rail travel?
I think one way you can look at it is if you like the time spent travelling. I think road usage is something like about 9 times perhaps greater than it is for rail in terms of the time spent. Now, some of that is a bit skewed by the fact that rail usage continues to recover from the pandemic, but nevertheless, that broad pattern sort of still holds. I think perhaps it sort of illustrates the value of making rail sort of as attractive as we can. We certainly would want to encourage a shift perhaps away from roads towards rail for the obvious environmental congestion, everything that goes to making that experience better for the passenger, be it at the station, be it at the catering on offer, not just the obvious stuff like value for money on fares, reliability and so forth, I think is really important.
What do we know about the profitability of these long-held leases?
Broadly, there wasn't a smoking gun which would say there is such egregious profitability being had here that we ought to be looking at that as a significant concern. But as I say, there's no question that prices are typically a bit higher. Some of that could be explained by slightly higher costs. But nevertheless, obviously, the more those protected leases are in place, the more one would expect that does give some degree of pricing power to the companies that are there.
That was Will Godfrey from the Office for Road and Rail, where railway catering is now definitely on the agenda. So, low competition, limited choice, high prices. What would those in the business say to those findings? SSP, that giant of global travel food we're just talking about, declined to talk to us but sent this statement.
Prices inside the station reflect a different cost base due to the unique operating and commercial conditions of the rail environment. there's already a highly competitive process for all new contracts in the UK rail catering space. We'll continue to work with the ORR on widening the process to existing units. One of our focus areas is ensuring that customers have choice at their local station. We're investing heavily in this through our Cafe Local brand.
We really wanted to speak to a big train company like Cross Country or LNER, which runs the majority of the UK's 2,500 stations, almost as the catering landlords. But mostly, they weren't keen to talk. Their representative body, the Rail Delivery Group, said the industry will continue working with the Office for Road and Rail to deliver what customers and communities need at stations. Avanti, formerly Virgin Trains, wrote to us that they, I quote, champion brilliant products made locally by small and medium businesses to support communities along their route. We'd be curious to hear from listeners who have experienced that kind of food on Avanti trains. Network Rail, which runs the 20 biggest mainline stations, as well as owning the actual rail infrastructure in the UK, sent us this.
Network Rail was keen to participate in this review and agree that healthy competition is vital in delivering good value to both customer and taxpayers. We do not offer new protected leases, and our strategy is to remove the remaining protected leases from our portfolio at the earliest opportunity.
Govia Thames Link Railway, the biggest operator of rail stations with 235 in their control, sent a statement from their commercial director, David Gornall.
We advertise our empty retail units more widely. As a result, we have a wide range of independent retailers trading from our stations. There's plenty of competition out there. One of our recent vacancies attracted more than 65 applicants.
One of the only people to go beyond the corporate statement and agree to speak to us was the managing director of Gourmet Coffee Bar and Kitchen, Nick Garnell, who has 30 outlets across the UK.
We came into rail catering, honestly, by accident. When I say we, it was my wife and I who set up the company back in 2007. And we were both working in the video games industry, so nothing whatever to do with coffee or with catering. But we were travelling a lot on trains, commuting on the West Coast line, and we couldn't work out why you couldn't get a decent cup of coffee. And you couldn't really get anybody to smile at you, even selling you a bad cup of coffee. And it was quite expensive. So almost in an idle moment, we wrote to Virgin Trains, as it was at the time, it's now Avanti, to say, look, I think you're missing a trick here. There isn't a great deal of good catering here. Would you give us a chance to have a go at this? And to our surprise, they said, well, yes, we would. That's an interesting idea. And we agree with you. Because what we hadn't really realised is that you go onto a big station and you look at the various retail units, catering units, but actually an awful lot of them are owned and operated by one company, by SSP. And they are occupying prime sites in most stations. They've been there for a long time. They're on protected leases. And up until COVID, and of course things changed dramatically in COVID, rail numbers have just been steadily and significantly increasing. So they literally have a captive market. And I think it's, I'm a competitor, so I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think it's fair to say they don't have to work very hard to sell to the people that are there. We did what's now called specialty coffee. That's the sort of industry jargon, sort of high-end single origin coffee on proper, barista-style machines, and a limited range of food because people are taking it onto a train, so you can't overcomplicate things. But we have fresh pastries, which we bake every day, so, pain au chocolat or croissant, whatever it may be, sandwiches, salads in season, etc., etc. And then try and stock a slightly different range of drinks, so it's not just bottles of Coke and Mars bars, because everybody's doing that, but something a little bit different.
I wondered what it was like moving into rail catering from the outside.
It's quite a strange world, railways, and I think it's probably maybe a little off-putting to somebody coming to it fresh. We certainly took us a while to get to grips with it. We thought, well, if we agreed terms on a site, as we quite quickly did with Virgin back in the early stages, to do some other locations, we'll plan it and we'll put in plans and we'll send shop fitters in. But actually, you've got to go through an awful lot of hoops to get approval for anything. I can't speak for every rail operator. As I say, we work with 7 out of I think it's 15. But we've found them to be quite receptive. I mean, I think they're conscious that they've inherited this limited sort of competitive environment. And I think where they can, they are keen to see new people come in. But there are physical constraints about creating new retail units. And it's been, I think, from a passenger's point of view, there's a perception of range, albeit a range between some fairly mainstream, well-known brands, whereas in reality, there isn't a great deal of competition.
But does the lack of catering competition really matter, given heavier worries about fares and the reliability of the trains themselves?
If you're a fan of one of the big brands that SSP are operating, then you're reasonably well catered for. But I think some of the positive developments in the food industry and the coffee industry have not passed the railways by, but they're not properly represented on railways. Long term, train travel makes fantastic sense. It's so much more efficient from a carbon point of view, from an energy point of view, to move people around by train than by car or plane. And again, we're biased, but we'd like to think that a government might invest in railways, think about sorting out the pricing, the ticket pricing, which is a little baffling, I think, for a lot of people. Possibly even subsidise tickets to encourage people onto trains. Because prior to COVID, even though there were significant problems with trains, the rail numbers were just steadily increasing. I think given the chance, people do like travelling by train. I don't think that nationalising is going to have much, on my understanding of the way in which it's going to be done, it's going to have much immediate effect on the food, because it's going to be a sort of rolling nationalisation where lines are taken over as the operating period comes to an end. So I think it's 5-6 years or so before everything would be nationalised. What's, I think, more important for passengers and for us as being reliant on passengers and trading on trains is that some real thought goes into strategically running trains and encouraging people to use it. I think when you're travelling on a train, the big thing is clearly that the train turns up and it goes to the place you want to go to and it's not too late. But after that, people quite like the small things, so if you can buy yourself, if you're into coffee or tea or whatever it may be, it just adds a bit of pleasure and enjoyment to the journey, out of proportion to the cost and actual significance of the thing.
Adding some real pleasure to the journey, yes. Nick Garnell of Gourmet Cafe Bar and Kitchen.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
We should remember that railway food in Britain has been a cause of misery and comedy for a long time.
Yes, we present the collapse of the British Railway sandwich system, or...
Our story opens in hell. The hell that drives many a normal person sane. The hell that we Londoners know as Clapham Junction Tea Buffet.
With a pounding heart, he approaches the counter and speaks.
Can I have some service, miss? I want to complain about this sandwich. It tastes like muck.
Mac? Let's see. Of course, it's a Mac sandwich.
A clip from the Goon Show on Radio 4, or the Home Service, as it was then, in 1954. The dried up and desperate British rail sandwich. It makes me wonder, does railway food today still live in the shadow of that comically awful reputation? Well, I zoomed in on someone who I hoped would know.
I'm Simon Calder and I'm the travel correspondent of The Independent. Here I am on the Italian-Swiss border, about to spend 97 Swiss francs, so over £80, on a 4-hour journey to Zurich. Yes, they've got great food on board, but it's way beyond my price range, so I've just stocked up, Sheila, with some very nice prosciutto, some vine tomatoes, and some good wholemeal bread.
Simon, is train food in Britain as bad as people think it is? You know, that somehow, you know, this overhang from the British rail sandwich, you know, curled up. Have things got better or worse, or...?
The absolute lowest point as a hungry or thirsty traveller on the railways of Britain was, I reckon, probably the mid-1980s. And yes, the sandwiches were lamentable. But you also had something called Klix, K-L-I-X, coffee, which was a tiny little plastic cup with a bit of pre-programmed coffee at the bottom. You get some tepid water poured on top of it, and that was your cup of coffee. So things are better than that, but we're still not in a great place.
How would you sum up the changes you've seen as a travel correspondent on the food on trains, but also on train stations?
As a travel correspondent, I have seen food disappear at a fair old rate from trains. It's absolutely the case that if you're a train operator, particularly on shorter routes, and you want to cut costs, then the way you are going to do that is by axing the catering staff. You're not even going to get a cup of tea on Southern now. You're not going to find one on South Western Railway, even though that goes as far from as London to Exeter, the pretty way, and Chiltern Railways going between London and the Midlands. No catering on board those because, frankly, it doesn't pay.
A new report by the Office of Road and Rail has found very limited choice and high prices due to the monopoly in rail station catering by that one big player, SSP. Do you have any thoughts on this and what it means for passengers?
Lots of people haven't heard of SSP, no reason why you should have done, but when you go into lots of our big stations, and indeed some smaller stations, the chances are that all or most of the catering possibilities are run by Select Service Partner, this strange offspring of British Rail Travellers Fare. This is an absolute cash cow. Of course, they got completely hammered during the COVID pandemic, but it earns lots of money for shareholders. It also earns, over £100 million a year for Network Rail and for the train operators, which goes a tiny way to reducing the terrible losses that we have on the railways. Now, a lot of the time, I find the choice in stations is fine. But, for example, if you take Birmingham New Street, you've got all the usual suspects within the station, but if you just nip out, you suddenly find yourself in the Grand Central Cafe, and there you can get some amazingly good British breakfast, for instance, some Middle Eastern specialities. It's a wonderful opportunity, and wherever you are, if you do a little bit of research, then you can probably find somewhere that is going to be a good alternative to what you've got in the stations, or indeed, you buy all your stuff and take it on board.
One of the thoughts, that we had travelling around on trains making this programme was that the mystery of the great rise in the rest of society of street food. Why aren't there more street food stalls in our railway stations?
The railway station area is extremely well regulated. I know that from a fact because very often, if I'm reporting on the latest disruption from outside a big station, I will literally be moved on by security because I'm just within this perimeter. And what happens within that perimeter is tightly controlled. And from the taxpayer and the passenger's point of view, that is probably a good thing to do. But it does mean you just do not get the choice that you might get. So that's why I'm encouraging enterprising chefs, people with food trucks, to be in the vicinity of railway stations, so that provides an alternative, provides some competition, because at the moment it's pretty much all sewn up. And as we know from transport, travel more widely, competition is great. It sharpens everybody and it benefits the traveller.
Do you think that railways could be leaders in trying to encourage people to eat better?
I think a lot could be done to remove the temptation to consume yet more junk food in the following way. Very often I will go into the many catering outlets at stations and I'll be encouraged not just to buy a kind of half decent looking sandwich, but look, there's a meal deal and you can have a can of fizzy drink and you can have some crisps with it. And I'm thinking, steady on, surely that's not being particularly responsible.
Are there good examples we could learn from?
While you are going across the Alps, you can dine extremely well. But the thing is, it's all jolly expensive. And I think there's only a couple of places that do catering on trains exceptionally well. The first one is India, partly because Indian Railways is, I think, the world's greatest transport enterprise. So you've also got the low cost of labour. So that means, you can get brought to your seat the most delicious food and that very special Indian tea.
Simon, thank you very much. Have a good journey to Zurich. Bye. Simon Calder, reporting from the front lines of Europe's railways. Someone has to do it. But there is one other country known for its outstanding train food.
Moshi Moshi. My name is Yukari Sakamoto. My full-time job, or most of my work, is doing market tours in Tokyo. Whenever we're traveling, if it's first thing in the morning, in the afternoon, late at night, we always purchase an ekiben to enjoy while we're on the ride. An eki comes from station, and ben is short for bento, and bento are the portable lunch boxes. So it's part of the ritual of traveling. And so when we're on the train, the ritual is you pull down the table in front of you. If you have a cloth, you could spread that out, make a little placemat. You set your bento out, usually have a drink that you purchase with it. And then it's fun. Most people will wait for the train to take off before they eat. So it's funny. A lot of times, as soon as the bullet train pulls off, you'll hear all over the car different people opening their cans of beer. Spish, 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 spish. But always after the train's taken off. It's not a written rule, but it's kind of like, this is part of our journey too. So what's fun about the ekiben is there are no rules. Every bento is different. Part of the fun of coming or traveling to new places is picking new bentos that are only available in those regions. It's fascinating that the Japanese are very good at trying to get a rainbow of colors in each meal. So, we usually see 5 colors in a bento. So red, yellow, green, black, and white. And so white would usually be rice. Black could be seaweed or some eggplant, a dark vegetable. Green is usually some type of green vegetable. Yellow could be eggs. And then red could be carrot or another red vegetable. So you usually see 5 colors in the bento, which is also very pleasing when you look down. If you see the 5 colors, you're already satisfied before you dig into the meal. And then usually things are cooked 5 different ways so that everything's not fried. You'll have something that's raw, something that's steamed, something fried and grilled. So then you're getting a variety of textures when you're eating the food. And then the other thing is usually see 5 flavors in every bento. So sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and then something spicy. So you always feel good after eating a bento. I sometimes think selfishly, once I get to my destination, I'm going to want to eat ramen or sushi or something that won't have many vegetables. So I always feel like if I get my fill of vegetables on this train ride, I can enjoy more what I'm going to eat in my destination. Our first train in Tokyo, or first train in Japan, was in 1872. And then our first ekiben, the first bento, was only 13 years later, 1885. And it was north of Tokyo in a station called Utsunomiya. And a very simple bento. It was a dried bamboo leaf that had onigiri, which are these rice balls, and some takuan, these crunchy yellow pickles made from daikon. So it's been around for over 130 years, this tradition of eating on the train. Every major station will have these ekiben. They're very affordable. And the nice thing is at the end of the train ride, there's a system for you to dispose of your ekiben. That's how much of part of the culture this ekiben tradition is.
So, no history of curled-up, desiccated sandwiches on Japan's railways. Yukari Sakamoto, a Tokyo-based guide to food markets. So, why does it matter when we eat on the move? Could it tap into something deeply primitive? After all, the earliest humans were nomads, whose methods of preserving food for their journeys was key to survival. So let's get back on the train with Caroline Eden, reading from her book, Cold Kitchen. She begins quoting from another great writer, Sybil Bedford, who's describing the picnic she'd brought with her as she and her companion set out to travel by train from New York City to Mexico in the 1940s.
Whenever I can, I bring my own provisions. It keeps one independent and agreeably employed. It is cheaper and usually much better. I got us some tins of tunny fish, a jar of smoked roe, a hunk of salami, watercress, a flute of bread, a bag of cherries and a bottle of pink wine. I drew the cork with my French zigzag, the neatest sound on earth. I just think that is a really hard sentence to beat.
Yeah.
I just love it. It's so evocative. Elaborate picnic, train picnic. Yeah, wonderful. I mean, a long journey, I guess, and the beginning of a journey. What is better than the setting off?
Here we are talking about journey food and, nasty, fridge cold sandwiches and delicious pasties, the contrast. But in a way, the beginnings of the human race, of us moving around, journey food was survival food, was key to becoming who we are.
So in Central Asia, you'd have these great big pans called a kazan, big round pans where you could cook plov, rice, meat, some onions or carrots. Obviously, you need to be a bit more settled to do that, but it's a food that travels quite well.
I mean, the basics of cheese, too.
And this is how the Kazakh herdsmen would survive and how they could conquer lands, because they would live on something called kurat, which was the dried milk curds. They're like these salty balls. You buy them everywhere. In the capital, Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan, Bishkek, for example, people sell it in prams. Little hard balls. It's a very acquired taste. It's extremely salty. But that was how I met a dairy producer in Kazakhstan, and he said, this is basically how we won, because we could live on this stuff, and we were such great horse riders, and they'd go for days and days and days with this kurat, these dried milk curds, horse milk. And that was how they managed. And they still eat this today a lot in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. I've eaten it in all the Central Asian countries.
Is it good?
You need a pint of lager to go with it, and then it's good. But kind of ingenious, and really one of our earliest foods, I'm sure. That's one of the ultimate journey foods. I've rather enjoyed this. To Perth.
Well, it's not crossing the steps, is it? No.
Not crossing the steps, but it was a lovely train picnic adventure. Yeah, journey for a journey's sake, why not?
Yeah. But thank you very much, Caroline. I mean, such an the traveller, and that you came with us on this little hop and a skip. But that was such fun.
It's absolutely lovely. Thank you ever so much.
The food programme was presented by me, Sheila Dillon, and produced by Nina Pullman for BBC Audio in Bristol. We hope you enjoyed journeying with us.
We all know what that music means. It's time for the Olympics in Paris.
I'm Matt Rogers.
And I'm Bowen Yang.
And we're doing an Olympics podcast? Yeah. We're hosting the Two Guys, Five Rings podcast. Watch every moment of the 2024 Paris Olympics beginning July 26th on NBC and Peacock. And for the first time, you can stream the 2024 Paris Games on the iHeartRadio app. And listen to Two Guys, Five Rings on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.